Have you ever had your entire savings drained by your own family and didn't even know it? I lost over $112,000 because I signed a form while half-conscious after surgery. Turns out, a power of attorney can be used to legally steal from you, and in my case, it was my parents who did it. I spent 2 years gathering evidence and reclaiming every dollar without going to court. In this video, I'll show you how to protect your finances even when you're vulnerable. The top 3 warning signs of family financial abuse that most young adults overlook, and how to take back control without burning bridges, unless you have to. I used to believe family always comes first. But after being gaslit, losing my emergency fund, and having to sell a car they titled in their name, I learned the hard way. Not everyone who raised you gets to run your life. If you've ever signed something you didn't fully understand, check it now. Every day you wait could cost you everything you've worked for. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way, I can send you a special shout-out. Now, let's begin our story together. I was reviewing a Form 1099 on a humid August afternoon when I noticed the wrong number. The kind of number that makes the air feel heavier. One line on my savings summary should have read $112,000 and some change. Instead, my screen showed $246.03. I blinked, rubbed the lens of my reading glasses on my t-shirt, and squinted again. The decimal stayed put. The money was gone. The kettle clicked off behind me, but I barely heard it. Sunlight fell through the IKEA curtains in pale stripes, catching steam from the chipped stoneware mug waiting by my laptop. I had bought that mug at a church rummage sale years earlier, and today the missing triangle of glaze on its rim felt like an omen. Only I hadn't expected the damage to show up in my bank account. A polite pop-up from the credit union invited me to view detailed activity. My index finger hovered, then tapped. Page after page appeared. Transfers labeled Linwood Family Trust, hundreds at first, then thousands. I scrolled until my scrolling hand began to tremble. The earliest withdrawal was nearly 10 months old. That meant I'd been losing money long before I even knew to look. I dialed the bank's support line, pressing 0 until a real human answered. A young man named Caleb confirmed the transactions were authorized through a joint power of attorney. Added, he said, in March of 2017. My memory jumped to a hospital room the morning after my appendectomy. Mom had smoothed my hair, whispered everything was handled, then slid a clipboard in front of me. I'd signed without focusing on a single word. Now the cost of that haze flashed on my screen in bright red negatives. Caleb spoke with the careful sympathy of someone trained not to offer legal advice. If you have questions about misuse, Ms. Linwood, you may want to speak with an attorney, he concluded. I thanked him, hung up, then pressed FaceTime. Miles answered on the second ring. Half his face was hidden behind a drafting lamp, but his voice carried the warmth I needed. Rach, what's wrong? You look pale. I'm trying to breathe, I admitted. They emptied my emergency fund, all of it. His eyes widened. Your folks? I nodded. Through that old POA, they siphoned it off like it was their allowance. Stay on the line with me, he said. We'll sort this out. I wished sorting were that simple. After a shaky sip of cooling Earl Grey, I placed my phone on speaker, scrolled to Mom's contact, and hit call. It rang 5 times. Sweetheart, Mom's voice burst out, sugary and high. I was just thinking of you. Mom, the credit union shows more than $100,000 transferred to your account. Why? She laughed, the same light laugh she used when I mixed up baking soda with powder at age 12. Oh, honey, it's temporary. Dad's dental surgery was pricier than we thought, and Haley's lease deposit came due. Family pulls together in hard times. It wasn't your money to take, I said, keeping my volume low even as my pulse thudded in my ears. Dad's voice cut in before she could reply. Rach, you weren't using it. You always said it was for emergencies. This is my emergency, I said. The chipped mug clinked against the counter as my grip tightened. You drained my future. Dad huffed. We'll pay you back eventually. Don't be dramatic." Mom sighed. "I raised you to share, Rachel. We're not strangers. We're family. Remember, your fund protects all of us." A phrase from years ago surfaced, Mom insisting an inheritance belonged to the household because we raised you, so technically it's shared. Back then I'd laughed it off. Now the words felt like wet cement around my ankles. "I need that money," I said, voice thin. I was a signature away from mortgage pre-approval. "Then delay the house hunt," Dad replied. "Markets shift every month." My stomach lurched. Miles's small image on the screen showed him shaking his head, mouthing, "Hang up." I drew a breath that tasted of old tea and did exactly that. Silence settled over the apartment, punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator. I deleted a dozen unread pings from the family group chat without opening them, then opened my leather-bound journal. Across the top of a fresh page, I wrote, "They used my healing time to plan a theft." The sentence looked stark in blue ink. I traced the letters once, closed the book, and set it beside the chipped mug. Somewhere outside, a motorcycle revved along the Mission Hills slope, the sound ebbing as quickly as my trust had. I turned back to the laptop, fingers stiff on the keys, and typed 3 words into a search bar. Power of attorney abuse. Autocomplete offered California before I finished the state name. I clicked the first link. The headline read, "It's not just betrayal, it's fraud." Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. I leaned in, letting the glow of the screen fill the growing dusk, and understood that the next step wouldn't be a polite phone call. It would be a line I drew in permanent ink. The night I signed away control of my life smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and lime jello. I was half awake in a recovery room at St. Mary's in Tempe, tucked under a synthetic blanket that crackled when I moved. The surgeon had removed 3 cysts through tiny ports in my abdomen, and the anesthesia still fogged the edges of the ceiling tiles. Mom sat beside the bed, smoothing my hair behind one ear in slow, practiced strokes. "Don't worry about the bills," she whispered, her voice the hush people use in church. "Just focus on healing." I tried to thank her, but my tongue felt thick. A clipboard appeared, held by a cheerful nurse who spoke in bullet points. Mom's hand guided the pen to my fingers. "It's standard procedure, honey. Just in case there's ever an emergency and you can't speak for yourself." The words emergency and can't speak drifted through the haze like distant sirens. I scrawled the loop of an R and the tail of an L. The rest of my name ran off the line, a curl disappearing into blank space. Dad signed beneath it without looking up from his phone. In memory, that signature glows red, but in the moment, I only felt relief when the nurse wheeled the clipboard away and the hum of the IV pump returned to center stage. I dozed, waking to the antiseptic sting of betadine at shift change, drifting again to the hum of vending machines. By morning, I was cleared to leave, stretching gingerly against the laparoscopic sutures while Mom gathered the discharge papers. What followed blurred into a season of rides to physical therapy, grocery bags appearing on my doorstep, and envelopes Mom promised to drop off at the insurance desk. She insisted on handling my mail, saying the bending and lifting was bad for my stitches. I let her, grateful for help I hadn't known how to request. Somewhere in that stretch of weeks, dependence settled into habit. I worked remote hours between pain pills, never quite noticing how my login to online banking was used less and less. 5 years later, back in my San Diego kitchen, I pulled a dusty banker's box from the top shelf of the hall closet. I had gone hunting for tax records and unearthed a souvenir from that surgery instead, a stack of neatly labeled folders in Mom's handwriting. The first held receipts for prescriptions she'd picked up on my behalf. The second contained bank statements still sealed. The third was heavy with notary seals. I sat on the floor, cross-legged among falling Post-its, and opened the manila envelope marked legal. There it was, Durable Power of Attorney. Effective March 14th, 2017. My signature, if you could call it that, looked like a child's first attempt at cursive, half a loop, half a lie. Dad's name was printed cleanly beneath mine, witness lines completed by strangers who had probably forgotten me before the ink dried. I felt the same slow nausea as when the anesthesia wore off years ago, but now it was tinged with anger. I flipped the pages, seeing clauses that granted my parents the right to manage, transfer, or dispose of financial assets as necessary. Necessary had apparently included maxed-out credit cards, Haley's first and last month rent, and a cruise to Cabo they once described as an anniversary gift from friends. The apartment was silent except for the buzz of the refrigerator. I heard doctor. Nina Hart's voice in my head, though I had only called her office that morning to schedule an appointment. Abuse isn't always loud, I imagined her saying. Sometimes it's a stack of papers no one explains. I reached for the chipped mug, cold tea now bitter, and took a swallow anyway. Then I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote today's date in the margin. Under it, I listed every favor that had felt like love in 2017, rides, groceries, utility payments. Next to each, I wrote the cost pulled from my account months later. The numbers didn't match, not even close. Guilt landed beside anger. How had I let this happen? I pictured that hospital room again, the dim light, Mom's soft command to sign just one form. I wanted to go back and place another adult in the chair, someone who would pause, read, say no. Someone like the woman I was now. I closed the ledger, stood, and began clearing my countertop. The ceramic spoon rest Mom gifted last Christmas went straight into the donation box. So did the framed cross-stitch that read, "Family is everything." I wiped crumbs into my palm and felt a small thrill at the empty space left behind. Outside, late summer traffic hissed along Washington Street. I could smell ocean salt mingling with exhaust whenever a breeze slipped through the balcony door. I carried the banker's box to the dining table, scanning each form into PDFs. My own signature stared back in grayscale, a fossil of obedience. I saved the files into a folder labeled Evidence, then backed them up twice. By dusk, the table was bare except for the power of attorney, its edges curling. I pressed the document flat, smoothing the crease with my palm until the paper grew warm. If they could do that when I was weak, I whispered, anger steadying into resolve. What won't they do now that I'm strong? I asked nicely. Then I asked again. This time I wasn't asking. Mom used to say I made everything into a war. The memory of her voice drifted through my mind as I stood in line at the San Diego DMV on a bright September morning. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and an automated speaker called out ticket numbers like a weary bingo caller. When my turn came, I slid the vehicle history printout across the counter. The clerk, a woman with silver nail polish and a wary smile, adjusted her glasses. "That Forrester is listed to a Marla and Dennis Linwood," she said after typing. "You're Rachel?" I nodded. "You need their signatures to transfer title." "My parents used a power of attorney they never returned," I explained quietly. "I have a copy here." I unfolded the document, my fingertip pausing at the notary stamp. The clerk studied it, then exhaled. "Well," she said, softening, "if the POA is still active, you technically have authority too." She stamped a form and slid it back. "Fill this out and the system will update the owner of record to whichever buyer you name." Outside, the first hint of autumn cooled the coastal air. I walked toward the parking lot, dialing Miles. He answered from a job site, the rumble of power tools in the background. "Good news?" he asked. "It's in their name," I said, buckling my seatbelt. "But because of that, it's also mine. I'm selling it." He let out a low whistle. "If the paperwork says it's theirs, play by their rules. Need me to run comps?" "Already on it," I said, feeling a spark of grim satisfaction. That evening, we met at our favorite coffee shop, a renovated gas station smelling of cedar and espresso. Miles opened his laptop, pulling auction values while I arranged an appraisal with a used car buyer who specialized in family SUVs. The appraisal agent, a middle-aged man in a crisp shirt, examined the Forrester's VIN by flashlight in my parents' driveway the next morning. He never asked why the owner lived 3 states away. Back home, I listed everything in a spreadsheet labeled reclamation. Purchase price 3 years ago, $27,000. Current offer, $11,800. Acceptable. I pressed send. 2 days later, I held a cashier's check, the ink still wet, while the Forester was loaded onto a flatbed. The driver nodded politely, unaware of the history he was hauling down Interstate 8. I watched the taillights vanish beyond the palm trees, then drove my own car back to the apartment with the windows open, letting the ocean air sweep through. That night, I sat at my dining table, phone glowing like a lantern in the dark. My thumbs hovered over the screen. Finally, I typed, "Sold the Forester. Title was in your name. Consider it partial reimbursement." I hit send, switched the phone to airplane mode, and set it face down. Silence rushed in, thick and welcome. I walked to the kitchen, pulled the faded wall calendar from a nail, and carried it to the balcony. July still showed a red ink note. Family BBQ, Mom's handwriting looping like ribbon. I struck a match, the sulfur catching my throat, and held the flame to the corner. The paper curled, edges glowing orange before collapsing to gray petals that drifted over the railing and disappeared into the night breeze. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of smoke and lavender dish soap. I rinsed my hands, then opened my laptop. Lines of numbers filled the screen. Bank transfers, appraisal notes, legal fees I had paid out of pocket. I saved the file and closed the lid. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders sat level, not braced for impact. A soft knock sounded. I checked the wall clock, nearly 10. Through the peephole, I saw Haley, hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes wide. I opened the door. "What did you just do?" she asked, breathless. I stepped aside so she could enter. Her gaze swept the room, landing on the empty space where the calendar had hung. "I fixed a mistake," I said. She shook her head. "Mom's in tears. Dad's furious." "They'll recover," I replied, voice even. "I recovered from losing $112,000. Haley's mouth opened, then closed. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, uncertainty dimming the easy confidence she wore at family dinners. I poured water into a glass and handed it to her. She cradled it like a question. "You could have talked to me first," she whispered. "I tried talking," I said gently. "No one listened." Outside, a siren wailed east toward Balboa Park, the sound fading as quickly as it came. Haley set the glass on the counter, tracing a circle in the condensation. "What happens now?" she asked. I met her eyes. "That depends on which side of the line you choose to stand." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk out either. In the quiet, I realized the war Mom feared had never been mine. It had always been theirs. The fight to keep me compliant. I had simply laid my weapons down and stepped out of range. Behind Haley, the living room window was open to the night. Cool air lifted the sheer curtain, and for the first time in months, I inhaled without counting the cost. Of course she sold it. Rachel's always been ungrateful. Mom's verdict drifted down the hallway as clearly as if she'd rehearsed it for the occasion. I hadn't even crossed the threshold of my parents' ranch-style house in Tempe, yet her words struck like cold water on the nape of my neck. I paused in the foyer, coat still draped over one arm, heart thumping hard enough to echo inside the framed family photos that lined the wall. Thanksgiving in Arizona usually smelled of sagebrush and distant mesquite smoke, but tonight the air was thick with scorched turkey skin and cinnamon candles working overtime. In the living room, mismatched folding chairs ringed the dining table, their scratched metal legs digging into the plastic runner Mom used to protect the carpet. Lights twinkled from a garland taped around the bay window, cheerful enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. Aunt Jean's laugh fluttered through the kitchen doorway. "Marla, honey, I'm sure she meant well," she said. Mom's reply came on a sigh. She's bitter, Jean. Always has been. The money was just sitting there doing nothing. I stepped forward, letting the floorboard give a soft, warning creak. Conversation stumbled to a halt. Mom wiped non-existent flour from her apron and pasted on the same hostess smile she'd worn since my high school graduation. "Look who made it," she trilled, as if my arrival were a pleasant surprise instead of a storm cloud they had tracked all week. Dad emerged from behind her, carving fork in hand, wearing an Arizona State apron I gave him in college. It was smeared with dark streaks of gravy. "Long trip?" he asked without meeting my eyes. "Traffic was easy," I said, hanging my coat. Haley appeared at my elbow and tugged me toward the sliding door. "Walk with me," she whispered. Her tone mixed nerves and urgency, like a child about to confess a broken vase. Outside, the November dusk felt surprisingly cool, the desert giving up its stored heat 1 degree at a time. A single strand of patio lights cast halos on the brittle grass. Haley hugged her cardigan. "You didn't have to do it that way," she began. "Do what?" I asked, though I knew. "Sell the car," she said, voice dropping. "They're mortified. Dad's worried you'll sue." I studied my sister's face, softened by porch-light shadows. "I didn't blow anything up, Hales. I revealed what was already broken." She looked away, tracing the grout line between 2 patio bricks with her toe. Somewhere beyond the fence, a dog barked, the sound carrying across tidy suburban lawns. "When Mom told people you'd taken the car money," Haley murmured, "she made it sound like you were punishing them." "I was reimbursing myself," I said, keeping my voice even. "That Forrester was titled to them. Their rules, remember?" Haley's shoulders drooped. "I just hate being in the middle." I thought about middle spaces, about the bank statement that sat in my purse like a bruise, about the way silence had always been painted as loyalty in our house. "Standing in the middle is comfortable," I said gently, "until the ground shifts." A timer dinged through the open kitchen window. We returned inside, where warmth carried the scent of overdone poultry. The turkey, perched on Mom's wedding platter, glistened a shade past mahogany. Beautiful outside, doomed inside. Mom announced, "Dinner is served," in a tone that dared anyone to refuse. No one suggested a blessing. Plates filled with stuffing that tasted of too much sage. Aunt Jean's sweet potato casserole was the only thing with moisture left. I sat between Cousin Nora and Uncle Greg, whose small talk about gas prices fluttered like tissue paper in a windstorm. Across the table, Mom cut tiny bites from her turkey slice, smiling too brightly at every brittle joke. Halfway through the meal, Dad cleared his throat and addressed the gravy boat. "You've made your point," he said, knife poised over leathery meat. "Let's move on." I dabbed my napkin. "Which point was that?" "That family should stay private," he answered. "We don't air dirty laundry, especially not at Thanksgiving." He was quoting himself. I'd heard that phrase since childhood. I set my fork down, letting the quiet widen. "Did you ever intend to pay me back?" The question dropped into the silence like a pebble in a shallow well. Forks hovered. Aunt Jean's eyes darted to Mom, whose cheeks colored behind foundation. Dad's jaw tightened. "Rachel, this isn't the time." "I think it is," I said softly. My pulse thudded, but my voice stayed calm. "You took $112,000 from me. You never mentioned repayment until I caught you. If I hadn't noticed, would you have told me?" Dad's stare slid to his plate. Mom inhaled through her nose. "You always make things harder than they need to be," she said, each word polished. Something in the room exhaled, maybe the collective hope for a polite evening. Plates resumed inching, but conversation shrank to coughs and chair squeaks. Cousin Nora reached under the tablecloth and squeezed my hand once. Quick. Across the turkey carcass, Haley looked at me not with anger, but something closer to awe. When the dishes were cleared without ceremony, I excused myself, claiming fresh air. In the foyer, I retrieved my coat, phone buzzing in its pocket. Outside, the desert night stretched cool and wide, the sky a deep violet spattered with early stars. I clicked on voicemail. Hi, Rachel. It's Dr. Hart. I know holidays can stir things up. Remember, boundaries that hold don't have to hurt. Call when you're ready. I let the words settle. Beyond the porch rail, a neighbor strung red lights along a cactus, humming a carol out of season. Behind me, laughter erupted, too loud, too forced, then fell abruptly quiet. I pictured the overcooked turkey drying under aluminum foil, a perfect symbol of a family roasted by its own need to appear golden. The front door opened a crack. Haley's silhouette framed the light. She didn't step out, only met my eyes. The look held apology, and maybe for the first time, respect. I pocketed the phone, inhaled the crisp air, and wondered how long it would take for the scent of smoke and cinnamon to fade from my clothes. Boundaries that hold, not hurt, I repeated silently. I took one last, steady breath, then stepped back inside to collect my things, ready to leave the plates and the silence behind. Being right didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing alone in a quiet room, the sort of hush that lets you hear the hum behind the refrigerator and your own pulse in your ears. Early January brought a rare chill to San Diego. Wind pushed low gray clouds across the harbor, and palm fronds rattled against one another like coins in a tin. I sat in Dr. Hart's office, knees crossed, picking at a loose thread on my sleeve while she studied me over tortoise-shell glasses. "You protected yourself," she said. "Why does that feel like failure?" "Because no one clapped," I answered before thinking. The honesty startled me. Dr. Hart's pen paused. "What audience did you expect?" I shrugged. Outside her window, a line of egrets lifted from the marsh, their wings catching what little light the day offered. Maybe my parents would realize what they did. Maybe Haley would tell me I was brave. "Sometimes courage is quiet," she said. "Recognition may never come from the people who wronged you." She slid a pamphlet across the coffee table. Financial Abuse in Families. The subtitle read, "Just because they didn't hit you doesn't mean it wasn't violence." I traced the letters as if they might smudge. Driving home, drizzle stippled the windshield. The traffic lights on Harbor Drive glowed red against wet asphalt, and each brake tap felt like permission to breathe. At a stop, my phone buzzed. Haley's name lit the screen. "They're talking about contesting the car thing. I'm staying out of it." My thumbs hovered. I typed, "Understood. Let me know if you need anything." I read the sentence twice, unsure who the offer was for. Back at the apartment, I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet called Reclamation Fund. Column A listed therapy copays, a medium latte after each session, new running shoes, 4 months of sunrise yoga streaming. Column B tracked small deposits into savings every payday. Column C listed joy, the used ukulele miles found at a flea market, 3 novels bought with a holiday gift card, 1 afternoon nap without guilt. The sum of those columns didn't erase what was gone, but watching the numbers grow steadied my breathing. That evening, Miles texted an invitation. Niece's birthday Saturday. Pizza, arcade tokens, chaos. Come? I stared at the screen, pulse ticking. Being around his family meant questions I didn't want to answer, faces that might mirror what I'd lost. I typed maybe, erased it, then wrote, okay. I pressed send before I could change my mind. Saturday arrived damp and cool. The party took place in Miles's sister's backyard, strands of pastel balloons tugging at their strings in the breeze. Children shrieked over a piñata shaped like a dinosaur. Miles's mom handed me a plate piled with pepperoni slices and veggie sticks. "We've heard a lot about you," she said, eyes kind. "Any friend of Miles is family." The word family pricked. I expected the usual ledger of judgments, but none came. Instead, I found myself helping tape streamers and refill lemonade, moving through small tasks that felt oddly healing. Tie a bow, hand out napkins, clap when the piñata finally burst. At cake time, Miles's 8-year-old niece insisted I sit beside her. She leaned over and whispered, "Uncle Miles likes you so much." I laughed, the sound rusty but real. After the last slice disappeared, Miles and I drove to the beach. Winter made the sand look pale and the water a deep slate green. We walked without speaking, shoes in hands, wind pressing our coats against our bodies. Gulls skated the air, dipping toward whitecap curls. I stopped near the tide line, letting cold foam lick my toes. Miles watched me from a few steps back, giving space. The horizon was nothing but gray moving into gray, yet the emptiness felt generous, like an open door. "This solitude isn't punishment," I said, voice low but sure. "It's freedom." Miles slipped his hand into mine. "Freedom has room to grow," he replied. We stayed until dusk bruised the sky, then headed to my apartment. A white envelope waited in the mailbox, my name in Mom's looping script. Inside lay a check for $2,000. Memo line, "Love, not war." The sum was random and wrong and somehow worse than nothing. I carried it upstairs, set it on the dining table, and stared. The paper looked flimsy under lamplight, a bandage on a severed limb. I opened the drawer where I kept unsent letters, drafts I'd written after each therapy session, pages filled with things I might someday say. I slid the check inside. Beneath a letter dated the night I discovered the empty savings account. Closing the drawer felt like lowering a lid on an urn. Before bed, I chose small silver earrings Haley had given me back in 2015. Tiny leaves that caught the light when I turned my head. I traced their shape in the mirror. Old ties, yes, but reevaluated. Some connections could stay, pruned into healthier shapes. Others would remain sealed in that drawer, lessons rather than lifelines. As I turned off the bedside lamp, rain began to tap the window. The apartment, usually echoing at night, felt softly full, as if resolve had weight the walls could hold. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without rehearsing arguments or adding columns of loss, and the room was not quiet in a lonely way, but quiet like fresh paint drying, ready for something new. The wedding wasn't big, but it was ours, and no one sat in row 2. The tide was low at La Jolla Cove that May morning, leaving a ribbon of firm, cool sand wide enough for a narrow aisle. Miles and I had pressed folding chairs into 2 uneven rows, leaving the second row empty, an intentional gap, a quiet reminder of people who had chosen absence over change. The scent of salt and blooming ice plant carried on the breeze, and gulls circled overhead, indifferent witnesses. I walked barefoot, clutching a bright cluster of sunflowers. Each step left a brief imprint that the next wave would erase, and that felt right. Miles stood near a driftwood arch his brother had built, a soft grin caught between joy and relief. Our friend Claire plucked an acoustic guitar, the chords light enough to float. When I reached him, he squeezed my hand. "Ready?" he whispered. "I've never been readier," I answered, the grains of sand cool beneath my feet. We skipped formal readings. Instead, we spoke the vows we'd written on postcards. Mine shook only once in the breeze. "What we build," I said, voice steady, "we protect. What we love, we tend." I promised to keep our walls strong enough for weather and our windows open for light. Miles answered with his own promise of respect, patience, and the kind of laughter that clears rooms of dust. Our small circle of friends let out a collective sigh that felt like the exhale after a held breath. Cousin Nora wiped her eyes, and when she hugged me, whispered, "You broke the cycle." Her perfume smelled faintly of lilac, the same scent Grandma used to wear. On the cliffs above, tourists paused to snap photos of sea lions. Down on the sand, Claire strummed the first notes of "Here Comes the Sun" just as the May-gray cloud layer cracked, spilling light over the water. No chair legs scraped in row 2, no cameras flashed from disapproving faces. The space they left stayed exactly that, a space. Dr. Hart's words drifted through my head like a seabird. Closure isn't a door they close. It's one you learn not to knock on again. That evening, the reception unfolded in Miles's backyard, where strings of Edison bulbs zigzagged between eucalyptus branches. The grill hissed, sending up curls of mesquite smoke while our friend Marco flipped burgers beside veggie kebabs. Hand-painted name cards marked places at reclaimed wood picnic tables. Anders, who'd covered my deadlines during the worst of the turmoil. Lydia, who'd driven me to late-night therapy when buses stopped early. Nora, who added a tiny sun sticker beside her name. While plates clinked, Lydia stood to toast. To Rachel, who taught us that peace sometimes looks like a line in the sand, and to Miles, who keeps the tide gentle. Laughter shimmered under the lights. I caught Miles's eye and felt gratitude ripple through me like warm water. Later, between the cake, lemon with lavender frosting, and a final round of hot cocoa, Nora pressed an envelope into my palm. The handwriting was Haley's. Inside, a card showed a watercolor of 2 desert poppies. The message read, "Maybe you were right. I'm sorry I couldn't say it out loud. A single sentence, but enough space for years of sibling shorthand." I traced the edge of the card, slipped it into my pocket next to my vows. My dress had pockets. I'd insisted on that detail the way some brides insist on lace. Pockets meant I could carry what mattered and release what didn't. When music shifted to a slow instrumental, Miles led me onto the grass. We danced barefoot, toes sinking into cool soil, the night smelling of jasmine and charcoal. The bulbs overhead fizzed softly, haloing friends who swayed in loose circles. For a brief moment, I felt every age I had ever been. Child giggling under sparklers, college student pulling all-nighters, woman counting the cost of betrayal, and I felt none of their weight. Near midnight, the guests trickled away,